Hey guys, how's it going? Craig here from Bass Lessons Melbourne, and I've got another player profile video for you. Super honoured to have next to me Mr. Jimmy Haslip. Jimmy, thanks you so much.
Thank you.
I saw your show the other night. It was blistering.
Hanging in there.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Work in progress.
So you're out here with Jeff Lorber?
Yes.
Yeah, doing the fusion.
We're here doing the fusion for the whole week, so it's been really a lot of fun. And also with Gary Novak, really fantastic, incredible drummer, and a saxophonist named Patrick Lamb, who's an old friend of Jeff Lorber's from Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
So a very fine saxophonist.
Yeah, sounding great. Mm-hmm. And hey, Patrick.
Hey, speaking of the devil. That's all right.
It's all good. Take it easy. So maybe we're just gonna get a little bit of history from when you started playing. I think you were about 13.
I started playing bass when I was 13.
Yeah.
I started playing trumpet when I was 7. So during the course of playing trumpet in the school bands and things, I hooked up with some buddies of mine that wanted to start a little rock and roll band, and they needed a bass player, so I was sort of elected to play bass. So not being able to find I'm left-handed.
Yep.
And it was very difficult to find a left-handed instrument. It was 1963.
Are you in New York?
I grew up in New York, yeah. Actually, Long Island.
Okay.
So very difficult to find a lefty bass, so I just ended up buying a righty bass, and then because I was left-handed, I just flipped it upside down. I knew nothing about the technique or being a trumpet player, and really just learning about music in general.
Yeah.
So I just flipped the right-handed bass upside down and learned how to play that. And
cool.
I didn't think it was going to be my career. I thought it was just going to be a fun thing to do with some schoolmates.
And I think that's how a lot of people start out.
Yeah.
You know?
And I loved music, so that was a no-brainer. It was, and it was a ball to like learn songs. And I had, I would say, just because of the fact that I grew up in a very musical household, not that there were other musicians in the household, but there was always a lot of music in the house. Yeah. My family loved music, so that obviously rubbed off on me, and I was listening to all kinds of things growing up, from salsa to jazz to big band music, classical music, and then of course a lot of music of my peers, which was anything from candy pop music to like R&B, Motown, to like more sophisticated pop music like Beatles and Rolling Stones, rock and roll, Led Zeppelin, all that started coming into play in the 60s, which I consider a renaissance in in music.
Sure. It's very good.
So I was kind of fortunate to be around learning about music while all that was going on.
Yeah.
And then living only about an hour away from Manhattan, it was easy to get to a big city like New York, And New York being a place where a lot of people wanted to play, I got to see almost everybody you could imagine in a bunch of venues around New York. There was the Fillmore East, there was Madison Square Garden. Down in the Village, there was a variety of jazz clubs, from the Village Gay to the Village Vanguard to even places like Folk City and the Bitter End, you know. All famous places, right? And then all around New York, there's a whole network of colleges. So colleges would have in their auditoriums and theaters would have concerts. So I got to see all sorts, you know, Sly and the Family Stone, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Yes, Frank Zappa, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan. You know, it was pretty incredible. And also, I must say, inspiring. So being that I was kind of learning how to play the bass and being able to see all this music firsthand was completely inspiring.
Was there like a kind of, you know, a certain moment where you kind of went, yeah, this is it?
It was my first year in college.
Studying music? Or?
No. My major was English literature, and I had a minor in theater. Yeah, that was my minor. And I must say I was completely bored. But I was attending my first year of school, and, you know, as you probably know, you know, first year in college is it's always hard. You're not really sure what exactly you want to do.
Figuring stuff out.
You're just figuring stuff out. So I liked English literature. I liked theater arts. So I just kind of went for that, to have something going on, to get my feet wet, so to speak. And then in the course of studying at this little community college, which was out on Long Island, I hooked up with some friends at a local bar, and I ran into a guy I hadn't seen in a while that I was actually in a band with in high school. And he had a cousin who was a really advanced musician, much older than me. You know, I was 18 and his cousin was like 28, which when you're 18, a 28-year-old seems ancient.
Yeah,
you know?
that's old.
So I ran into this friend of mine, and he said, hey, my cousin's putting a band together to do some club dates, and they're looking for a bass player. If you're interested in auditioning, you know, here's the number, call them up. So I called the number just on a fluke. I went to the audition, played a bunch of tunes with these guys. It was basically a B3 player, which was my friend's cousin, guitar player and a drummer, and then I played a bunch of tunes with them. And I left there feeling pretty good, but I thought they're never going to hire me. I'm too young and green and all that. These guys were all experienced, kind of, you know, had a lot going on. Yeah. And lo and behold, I got a phone call a few days later, and I got the gig. And then what happened was I started doing club dates with these guys. I had to learn like a 50-tune repertoire, and started doing club dates with them like 7 nights a week, 5 shows a night.
5 shows a night?
Yeah, starting at 9 to 9:45, 10 to 10:45, 11 to 11:45, and onward till like almost 3 in the morning, right?
Yeah, wow.
And then to get to class next day was really getting pretty rough. So I had to make a decision at one point, and I ended up leaving school and, you know, focusing on playing with this band. And I think right around then is when I decided,
you got the bug.
Let me check this out. This is a lot more fun than English lit classes.
Absolutely.
So,
and, I mean, back then, how do you go around learning that kind of repertoire? I know if I'm prepping for a gig, I either look it up on YouTube or you know, I have access to it online. But how did you go around learning, you know, 50 top 40 hits of the day?
Well, I had a lot of records, and some of the music that was on the list to learn, I already sort of knew it, you know, from playing in the bands that I was in high school and junior high school. They were just like some typical R&B tunes, you know, some Sly and the Family Stone, James Brown, Wilson Pickett, you know, some really cool tunes that I already kind of know, you know, Cold Sweat, you know, things like that. Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, I Want to Take You Higher.
Set lists haven't changed.
Yeah, and even like groups like Creedence Clearwater, you know, there's a song called On the Corner. Yeah, that's a cool tune.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that. So I kind of already had a handle on a lot of the repertoire. And then there were things that I'd never heard of. So I went out to, like, we had record stores back then. So I went and bought the 45s. I had a little turntable, put it on there, and I'd sit there for an hour and pick out the bass part. You know, no chart, nothing, just listen to it. And, you know, I had a pretty good ear for music, so I could pick stuff up really quick. And in doing that, I ended up memorizing stuff really quickly as well.
Way, I think.
So I prepared myself, went to, I think it was a couple of rehearsals, and then boom, we got into this club. It was a 2-week engagement, 5 shows a night for 2 weeks in one setting, you know, one place. And it was awesome.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So.
Were you playing P-bass back then?
The first bass I had was a weird little Japanese instrument called a Zimgar bass. It was like 3/4 neck.
Okay, cool.
So, you know, I mean, I didn't really know a lot about the instruments either. So, and that was like the cheapest thing I could buy. I didn't have a big budget. So I bought that and learned, like, in the first band I learned like maybe 15 tunes that we played at parties, but then the repertoire started getting bigger. And as I started playing with other musicians, I started realizing I needed a better instrument. So the next instrument I got was a Hofner Beetle bass.
All right.
Which was a really cool instrument. I wish I still had it.
Yeah.
I bought it in 1967, and it was the violin Paul McCartney version. So I played that for probably the last 3 years of my high school, from like sophomore, junior, senior year.
Sure.
And then when I hooked up with these guys playing the top 40 band and all that, they hipped me to what was the hip thing to do, was to have a P bass.
Right.
So I went and I got a P bass.
Okay. And do you still have that one?
No, I wish I did. That was a 1969 blonde, left-handed precision.
Yeah. And so how was the jump? What was the jump from P-bass to
a more exotic instrument?
Yeah, to something slightly more advanced.
So in 1975, after bouncing around the U.S. for a while, in 1975 I ended up in Los Angeles to work with this drummer, a famous drummer named Carmine Appice. Who played with the Vanilla Fudge and Rod Stewart and a variety of other, Jeff Beck.
So you went out there to play with him?
Yeah, I met him prior to moving to Los Angeles in New Orleans, and he invited me to come to LA to do some stuff with him possibly, and I thought that was an interesting opportunity, so I ended up over there and I hung with him, and I did I did a record with him. And then through him I met some other really great musicians, and you know, I eventually decided to live in Los Angeles to, you know, see what would come about, and there was a lot going on there at the time. So I thought this could be a good place to be for a musician. So I started playing with a lot of people, and then I met another bass player at one point who turned me on to Bernardo Rico. Do you know who that is?
I don't know Bernardo Rico.
Bernardo Rico started a company called BC Rich. Okay, so I met Bernardo, and Bernardo was very kind and saw that I had some talent and offered to build me an instrument.
Cool.
And that was the first exotic bass I had, which was BC Rich Eagle. I think that's Eagle. The model.
I mean, they all had some kind of point, I think.
Yeah. They had some kind of name or whatever. So this was a BC Rich Eagle bass. It was all made out of koa, which is a Hawaiian wood. And he experimented with my bass. He said, I got these new pickups in. They were hand wound special Damasio pickups. So he put those in there. So I had that bass for a while.
And that was still just 4-string?
That was a 4-stringer. And then I ended up getting a lot of gigs playing with various people. So played with Tom Scott, Steve Kahn, Flora Purim and Ayrto, Harvey Mandel, Tommy Bolin.
Okay.
So I was playing with all those people. But I was using the BC Rich bass for some of those gigs, and for some of the other gigs I'd use the P bass.
Sure.
So,
depending on what the aesthetic was.
Right. Like with Tommy Bolin, I mostly played the P bass because it was this rockin' gig. You know, seemed to fit the profile.
And was the BC Rich P pickup in jazz, or?
It was like a P bass configuration.
Okay.
Yeah. So and I was mostly using that in the studio for some reason, but I would break it out and do live gigs as well. I used it exclusively, I think, with Flora Purim at one point. But then I went back to just playing like P basses and stuff, and then I got a bass built there was a music store in LA called Valley Arts that was pretty famous. In fact, Larry Carlton was one of the owners of the store.
Okay.
And there was a really hip luthier on the premise. So I had a bass built by him, which is kind of like a souped up Fender bass,
right?
P bass kind of thing. And I used that with Chaka Khan and Al Jarreau, a bunch of people.
Is
like
that what's on Montreux?
Yeah. Was it? I think it was. Boy, I'm trying to remember now what I played on. I think I was playing my P bass.
Right. I
was playing the Fender P bass.
That's a great album. Gig. Yeah, the live in Montreux thing.
Yeah, the Casino Lights.
Yeah.
And oh, you know what? I think right before we did that, we signed a deal with Yamaha. So I had a Yamaha BB 1200.
Okay.
I think that's what I actually used on the video and probably on the record.
Right. Okay.
As well.
4-string?
4.
Okay.
I didn't go to 5-string until I think it was around 1985.
Okay, it's pretty early.
And I had gotten a 5-string in like 1984.
Right.
But I was a little chicken to play it full time. And I thought, in order to really break this out, I need to spend time with it. So I spent a lot of time with it, and then I broke it out like maybe tail end of 84, 85. And then I was using it with the Yellowjackets, and that was Yamaha.
Right.
Which was a funny thing because, you know, whenever you endorse an instrument, they always tell the endorsees if you have any ideas and things to share with our R&D department, you know, please bring those ideas forth and, you know, we'll look into it. So I had gone to a concert near my house where I was living in Los Angeles, and it was Claire Fisher. Do you know who that is?
I know the name.
He's a piano player. He's no longer with us, but a brilliant piano player, and he kind of wrote this modern salsa jazz music, you know. So I was checking him out in this little club near my house, and the bass just seemed to have a lot of extra low end, and I was going, what is that? And then I noticed that the bass had 5 tuning pegs.
Ah, who is the bass player?
Jimmy Johnson.
Ah, cool.
So I walked up to Jimmy John. I never met him before. I introduced myself, and I asked him about his instrument. He had an Olympic 5-string bass, and he showed it to me. He was very gracious, and I drove home, and I said, I'm going down to Yamaha, and I'm going to tell them that the next thing that's going to be happening for the electric bass is 5 strings, having a low B string below the E. So I went down to Yamaha, and they looked at me like I was out of my mind, except for one guy. And that one guy sat down with me and said, do you really want a 5-string bass? And I said, I'd love to get one. So he put an order in, and oversaw the making of a 5-string Yamaha bass, which they didn't have in stock.
Right.
He made a special instrument out of a BB3000.
Ah.
I got the instrument, I paid for it, and took it on the road. And then supposedly, I don't know this for sure, but I heard through the grapevine that they got dozens upon dozens of requests for their new 5-string bass. So they scrambled and they came up with, in the shop, with an instrument that they called a BB5000,
Right.
which was their first 5-string bass.
Yeah.
And then I believe Nathan East got one.
So it's your fault.
It's kind of my fault, although I don't care who got credit for it.
Yeah.
All I cared about was that I got one,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was able to take it on the road and work on it. And
Yeah, cool.
so after that, I met Mike Tobias, and then I started totally being involved in playing exotic instruments. So I played
Yeah.
Tobias for many years. Then Then the next guy I met was Keith Roscoe, and he makes my instruments now. Although I'm still doing work for MTD,
Okay.
because eventually, Mike had to sell his company to Gibson. Gibson didn't really do a good thing with him. They I think they kind of screwed him over on some level, and basically let him go.
Right.
Took his company, and as far as I'm concerned, it's my opinion, but I believe they pretty much destroyed the quality of the instrument.
Right.
So Tobias is from, like, say 1990, 91 on, are Gibson made and not good quality, and everything prior to that is Mike's work, and that's the beautiful instruments that we all loved. Yeah. And I happen to own a few of those.
Oh, some of the older ones from there.
Yeah, I still have two beautiful fretlesses that Mike made me. He made me one in 1987 and one in 1988. And the one in 87 was a 5-stringer, and the one in 88 was an 6-stringer.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
So. And I have a few 4-stringers that are still really cool that I'll bust out and use in the studio. So that's it. Those are the instruments. I'm still playing MTDs. I still have some other interesting instruments that I play in the studio, including this gentleman made a bass for me in Japan, a company called Innerwood, and it's one of the main workhorses in the studio. Okay. It's like a souped up P bass.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how the P bass and jazz bass is still very much the staple in the studio stuff. It's what we've heard on so many records, I guess. That's
fits. The deal.
And I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Yeah, cool. Talking about studio work, you mentioned that you were doing a fair bit of producing, or have been.
I have been over the years. Yeah. I've produced probably close to 150 records to date, which all kind of started in the 80s. But it really kind of took hold when I left the Yellowjackets in 2012. And part of my reason for leaving was that I was getting a lot of solicitation to produce, and I just couldn't find the time on the calendar to make it all work. And it was work that I was really interested in.
Yeah.
And
how long were you with the Yellowjackets for?
32 years. 30 years. So. Yeah. So at that point, I was kind of feeling like I needed to do something else, and the production thing was just kind of, coming at me in full blast. And I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to change my direction here. In 2012, I turned 60, and I started thinking about that as well, because I've been touring quite a bit since the mid-'70s. So was kind of like, this might be a good time to just kind of slow things down with the touring, spend more time at home, and spend more time in the studio. So, kind of a healthier environment in that sense. And also focusing and submerging myself into work that I was very interested in learning more about, which I already had, I think, a pretty good sense of it.
Because you've done so many albums.
I'd already done, yeah. And I co-produced 20 Yellowjackets records,
sure.
and those were pretty ambitious. So I learned quite a bit doing just that.
Yeah.
And then I did a lot of outside stuff all through the years as well. But since I left the Jackets in 2012, I've produced over 40 records. So it intensified, and I was able to also accommodate, schedule-wise, all these projects. So I've been averaging about 10 records a year.
Okay. And so from 2012 till now, what's been kind of your live diary, your gigging diary like then?
Well, live playing, I've hooked up with a few things, mostly with Jeff Lorber. Okay. Because I also been co-producing those records. So we're working on our 5th Jeff Lorber Fusion record right now. And so I've done 4 already, of which I mentioned to you before, 2 were nominated for Grammys. So that's been a fruitful and fertile relationship.
Did the Grammy nominations then, did the phone start ringing more because you were suddenly on a list for production, or is it hard to kind of gauge?
It's hard to gauge, but I mean, I have to thank the Yellowjackets for the whole Grammy connection, because I was nominated 18 times with the Yellowjackets, so. And then there was a record that I was part of the nomination, which was a Bob Mintzer record, which essentially was a Yellowjackets record.
Sure.
So,
right.
So in essence, I got 19 nominations with the Yellowjackets, and then these 2 with the Jeff Lorber Fusion. So, I'm honored, and on a different level, it's been incentive and inspiration to keep doing what I'm doing. Because it's just fuel for the fire.
Sure. Yeah.
And I definitely have a fire. I think my wife will vouch for the fact that I'm a workaholic, but it's it's beautiful work. To be.
It doesn't feel like work.
No, you're surrounded by wonderful musicians, and you're making music. Music is a beautiful gift.
And how do you? Because obviously you've been making records for a few years. How would you say your production style has shifted, maybe in relation to the technology, or just in relation to your experiences from the 80s to 2000, for example?
Well, bottom line is always, when I'm producing a record, I just want to make sure I got, the best songs that could be included in a project, because songs are the most important part of a record.
Pre-production as well you're involved in?
Yes, pre-production, and then, if you're fortunate to have an artist or a band that have wonderful composers, they're writing really interesting, unique, wonderful music, that's great, but that doesn't always work out. Sometimes you're working with an artist that needs help along those lines, so, I know where to find music. You could do covers maybe, or hook up with other writers and arrangers, and, work on getting the music up to a high quality. Yeah. And so that's the most important thing. Then, all these other things come into play in the process. So there's all the technology. And of course, technology has grown intensely over the years. I mean, when I first started recording in the 70s, I did some recording in the late 60s, but that was all tape. And the whole different ball game there. And now basically we're just looking into computer screens, and it's all zeros and ones. You know? So tape is gone, and but having an open mind, which I recommend to all musicians. You just keep learning, and it's an opportunity to learn new things.
Yeah.
And in learning new things, you end up becoming better at your craft, and hopefully more creative and better at what you do.
Sure.
Because the technology, if it's used correctly, will make you better.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's a tool. It's like an instrument. It's you gotta, on some respect, you gotta practice it as well to get the most out of it.
And I'm not really I'm not like a killer Pro Tools guy.
Yeah, you're not all shortcut.
Jeff is.
Yeah.
Jeff is killing. So I'm fortunate to work with him, and he's got full-blown Pro Tools up at his studio, and that's where we do his records. And then I'm fortunate to have relationships with at least another dozen or so engineers that are also astute in Pro Tools and other Logic, DP. I even I'm recording a guy now he's demanding on doing the sessions himself, overdubs, and he's on Cubase, which is something that I don't know a lot about, but engineer that's the chief engineer on the project knows a little bit about it, and knows other people that know about Cubase. So it all works. It all works. Yeah. And the bottom line is making a nice record. So you have all this.
That hasn't changed.
No, that has not changed. Because you want to try to get the best out of every project. Sure. The best possible playing, the best songs, and the best sonic sound and all that. And I'm not saying that I accomplish that every time I produce something.
That's the goal, anyway.
But that's what I'm looking for. Sure. Looking to do that on every record. And sometimes I achieve that, and sometimes I don't. But I'll get close, and at least I try. Yeah. So the intent is always there.
And you kind of in a situation where you can really just be involved with stuff that you want to be involved with, I guess, because you're no pressure from labels or anything.
It's mostly, It's mostly that.
Still got to pay bills and stuff.
But I have taken on other things, to be honest, because of financial needs. Sure. I have a family, and it's the way I make a living. So, and in those cases, I still want to do excellent work. Sure. And I want to bring the artist up to a higher level. Yeah. And hopefully create something that will be part of what their vision was. Or their entire vision. Hopefully. But I'm very open-minded when I produce. Other than probably the toughest thing is just to make sure that you got good songs, because ever since I was a kid, especially in the 60s, radio was really important, and you always heard really good songs on the radio, It's maybe not the case today, but I'm always searching the radio for new music. Scanning, and even sitting in a restaurant, and like today I was at a coffee shop and I heard something, and I was disappointed because I have this app on my phone. If I don't know something, it's Soundhound. Yeah. So I held it up, but it was too noisy in there, so I couldn't get this song. I'm always listening and trying to learn about new artists, new music, and being a producer, I think it's part of my job description to always be on the lookout and have my ears open and listen to as much music as I can. And I listen to everything, from classical, Latin, jazz, funk, rock, pop, country, you name it. I listen to it, and I try to find,
Is there any recent or current artists that have really caught your ear in the kind of jazz or fusion or funk world?
Yeah. Gosh. Well, there's in the funk world. There's funk pop. There's a band that I watch on YouTube, and I've actually played. It's two people. It's a drummer named Lewis Cole, and his girlfriend. Her name is Genevieve, but I forget her last name. And they have a group called Knower. It's Knower. I'm a big fan of theirs.
Right. With Tim LaFave.
Yeah, Tim LaFave plays with them. Yeah, that's right.
We had Tim on the.
That's right, and I'm a big fan of Tim's.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that stuff is.
Yeah, and it reminds me of some stuff that I was a big fan of. I believe in the '80s, '80s. It was a group called Screedy Politi.
Oh.
Yeah. So it has. If you get a chance, Google Screedy Politi.
Screedy Politi. Mm-hmm. Everything comes from somewhere, huh?
Yeah, and you'll hear they're not. I don't think they're stealing anything from anybody, but you'll hear some. I don't even know if they listen to Screedy Politi, but I hear some remnants of what that was in their music, and it's awesome. It's that really super tight funk, groove stuff, you know.
Cool.
So yeah, I like that. As far as musicians, gosh, there's a lot of people. I'm trying to remember everything I've been listening to. There's, and I can't remember her name now. There's a gal, she's a saxophonist I believe she's from Columbia.
Okay.
And she went to Berkeley, and I think she won like the Thelonious Monk Award, and then she ended up with a record deal on Concord. She's done a couple of records, I think, for them, and they're awesome, and she sounds great. But you know, lately, God, if I could have, I would have prepared a little list because I listen to so much stuff.
Just curious. Snarky Puppy. I mean, they've obviously.
Yeah, they're cool. You know, there's a kid that I'm a big fan of who's from England. His name is Jacob Collier.
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
Super talented.
Yeah. So big fan of his.
There's a band from Melbourne who have been getting some traction. Hiatus Coyote.
Oh wow! I'll have to look them up.
Yeah, I think they had a Grammy nomination and
awesome.
Super, kind of real melting pot of like synth pop, but with super tight, you know, almost like programmed beats, but it's all live. And
oh, good.
Yeah, really, really awesome.
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, at the gig the other night, first I saw you play a couple of years ago with Robin Ford and Michael Landau, and that was with Gary.
Yeah, Gary was playing drums. Yeah.
But with the fusion gig, Jeff Lorber, it felt like you had a really your R&B roots really kind of shone through. I thought.
Yeah.
Especially kind of that Rocco 16th.
Oh, I'm a huge fan of the Tower of Power.
Right.
Yeah, and of course Francis Rocco Prestia. Huge fan of his, and I remember hearing the first time I ever heard Tower of Power. I was living in San Francisco in 1971.
Okay.
And this tune came on the radio. I was in a car and had the radio on, and I said, "What is this?" Never heard anything like it. And they said, "Oh, that's a local band from Oakland over here called Tower of Power." And I ran right out and got their record. They had a record out called Bump City, which was an earlier release. And then I think they had just released What Is Hip.
Right.
So, and
that's what's hip.
Yeah, I bought that and I took it back to where I was staying and submerged myself in that for months. So, and you know, I studied on and off during the course of a year in 1975 with Jaco Pastorius. Oh. And Jaco was, I think, a big fan of Rocco's as well.
Well, those two guys, I mean, their 16th and your 16th subdivisions are just so, you know.
Jaco showed me some things to work on, so, and I did. And even then, he actually acknowledged that I had fairly good technique, and that was a big compliment coming from him.
Yeah.
But he gave me some exercises and some things to focus on, which really kind of put me in a good path.
Yeah.
You know?
Technical or more kind of musical, holistic kind
Just
of
the
stuff?
technical things,
Right.
like, you know, he told me to study some Bach etudes and to like really listen to each note and try to give each note the equal quality of, you know,
Importance.
of importance. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hadn't really, you know, I had chops and I was playing a lot of fairly intricate R&B music in those days, but after spending some time with him, it really made me focus further and put myself under the microscope.
Because he kind of had that, he did the R&B cover band, you know, Shed Time as
yeah.
well.
Mm-hmm. He played with Wayne Cochran, right?
Wayne Cochran, CC Riders.
CC Riders, a big R&B band.
Cool.
That was an awesome band, you know. So yeah, I mean, and that was in the early 70s, mid 70s. So I went on a tirade to like practice my ass off.
Would you say that was your woodshed?
Before that was.
Before that.
Yeah, but it extended after I met Jocko.
After you met Jocko, yeah.
Because from like 1971 to 1975, I was averaging anywhere from 6 to sometimes 10 hours a day of practicing.
Huge.
And then, you know, with days off too, you know, which I had a really cool teacher to start because I play very unconventional. So I got turned down by a lot of teachers who said, you know, either you learn how to play right-handed or I'm not teaching you, you know.
Still notes, it's still music,
yeah.
you know.
So I would get depressed and walk away, and then I'd practice on my own. And then finally I hooked up with a guy who was a tuba player. Okay. And he taught me. And I learned all the diatonic system with him, the pentatonic system. And he even showed me to play some piano. Okay. And he said, "This is important." Is that doing okay?
Yeah.
He's
moving around. That's it.
This first teacher that I really spent time with showed me the importance of like learning how to play a little piano. You know,
sure.
To really help out. And in essence, I have to blame him for then that being an inspiration to move ahead with getting into composition.
Okay.
So that's when I started really focusing on writing.
Sure.
And it came in really handy years later when I even before that, but when I joined the Yellowjackets, it came in really handy because then I was able to contribute along the lines of the composition.
Yeah, yeah. And my friend asked me.
So Rocco.
So Rocco, yeah. There's definitely that in there. And would it be fair to say there's a certain amount of kind of blues lyricism in your melodic playing?
Yeah, and that has a lot to do with the fact that for like 5-6 years, I lived in a duplex in Los Feliz, which is a little area of Los Angeles, near Griffith Park. It's a little residential area there. And I lived in this duplex. I lived in the downstairs apartment, and upstairs was Robin Ford. So I spent a lot of time with Robin, and I picked up a lot of that blues. And at the time, I was looking for a voice somehow to, you know, how can I really get something a little different in my soloing chops? Because I didn't feel like I had a good handle on my soloing, and I was working on it. I had chops, but idea-wise, I was really struggling. And then when I spent time with Robin and started playing a lot with him and hanging with him and doing some woodshedding with him, I started picking up all this blues stuff, and then I started studying blues players. So I was listening to Eric Clapton and Hendrix and B.B. King and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And that kind of became the foundation for my soloing. Yeah. Although in many of the recent years, I've been trying to expand on all that. And I can't say I'm like a bebop player, because that's, you know, in reality, I was never really a jazz player. I mean, I grew up playing R&B music, rock and roll, and pop. And I had a instinctual good feeling about Latin music, because I'm half Puerto Rican, and I grew up in a house that played day and night, would play Tito Puente, Ray Barretto, Celia Cruz, Mongo Santa Maria, and that stuff is in my blood.
Yeah.
You know? So I have a good rhythmical concept, thankfully, through that music and other things that I learned over the years.
Yeah.
So that's really the bottom line for my playing. And so, you know, I see a lot of guys that are, you know, astute bebop players on electric bass, and that's not something that I normally gravitate towards.
Yeah.
It's not part of my vocabulary.
Yeah. But you've managed to carve out your own voice, which I think is...
I have a little different slant on
Yeah.
things, and it is what it is. And it works really well, I have to say, with the music of the Jeff Lorber fusion, because it's all steeped in R&B
Yeah.
and this jazz fusion kind of element. You know, everything from like a little bit of Weather Report to like, you know...
Some headhunters a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, you know, that's all in my wheelhouse, you know.
And playing with Gary Novak, you guys have done quite a lot of work together. How do you feel you work with drummers, or what's your happy place in terms of a rhythm section?
The kick drum.
The kick drum. Yeah.
That's my happy place. And I'm a frustrated drummer. I love drums. You know, I actually started playing drums at a very young age, but never really got anywhere with it. And you know, I learned a lot about percussion instruments because of the whole
Puerto Rican
thing. And when I was a tiny kid, I used to get dragged to all the family weddings and parties, right, with all the Puerto Rican relatives, and they would be, you know, like cooking an entire pig, you know, on a skewer, right, and you know, all the traditional Cuban, Puerto Rican food, and listening to salsa music, and sometimes there would be live salsa bands too.
Cool.
So I would actually see firsthand guys playing cowbells and shakers and maracas and congas and bongos and timbales.
Okay.
And all that stuff was like so inspiring to me, you know. So when I get together with a drummer, no matter who it is, the first thing I do is lock into the kick drum. And I figure if I got that going on, the band has a foundation, solid.
Yeah.
Then once you start playing with somebody, even if it's just one time, you pick up things pretty quickly as far as what they do and how they phrase things. And I have kind of a, you know, I mean, I've been playing for over 50 years now, so I have some kind of pretty cool instinctual kind of things that just sort of happen, you know. And I played with enough drummers. In fact, I did a thing with a drum magazine in London.
Okay.
They asked me about drummers and relationship with bass players, and drummers, very important. And I gave them a list of all the drummers that I've been working with over the years. I don't even know how many guys are on it. I'll be happy to send you the list.
That'd be interesting, yeah.
I'll send you a list of all the drummers and percussionists I played with.
Is there some maybe highlights from there? Guys that you really connected with?
Oh yeah, well, Will Kennedy with the Yellowjackets, Ricky Lawson, who was the original drummer with the Jackets, and I did a year or so of playing with them prior to the Yellowjackets with Flora, actually a couple of years, with Flora Purim's band and with Roy Ayers' band.
Oh, Roy Ayers.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So I did like a 5 or 6 month tour with Roy Ayers and Ubiquity. And Ricky was the drummer. Vinny Colaiuta, who I started playing with when he first came to LA in 1977, something around there. Gary's special player, I love playing with him. I did a lot of sessions with Jeff Piccaro.
Did you?
And I did some with Jim Keltner.
Okay.
I love playing with those guys.
Yeah.
I also did a fair amount of sessions with Carlos Vega, who was really wonderful. I did a lot of playing with Peter Erskine.
Oh.
Really fantastic musician.
That's a pretty...
Right there is a kind of an eclectic bunch of people, and then of course I've done quite a bit of playing over the last 2+ years with one of the homegrown drummers from Melbourne, Virgil Donati.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
That covers.
And then throw in Dave Weckl. And then
Why not?
Why not?
Bit of the Weckl.
So with all that, all different drummers, all different concepts, techniques,
and you
all
need to, at that kind of level, guys who are chameleon-like but also have their own voice. Like, do you find that it's you meet in the middle, or sometimes that's where he's sitting, or sometimes it's the other way around?
Well, I think it's always a conversation on some level, but I tend to always be willing to go to the drums because I'm a frustrated drummer, and I look at the bass as being a melodic drum.
Okay.
You know,
yeah,
because it's
like
very rhythmical.
Like in Latin music, yeah.
And if I'm copying for say like a drum beat on the bass, you know, kick, snare, hi-hat, and I'm playing something that's in unison on some level, or at least you know, identifying certain portions of what those patterns are, then basically I'm playing a drum beat on the bass, but I'm adding notes to it. So
interesting.
that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
And rhythm has always been probably the strongest part of my playing of anything. And then I, over the years, learned about the different genres and what's expected, you know, from reggae to, you know, walking bass and straight ahead jazz to, you know, funk, you know, R&B bass stylings like James Jamerson or Chuck Rainey, you know, Anthony Jackson, you know, people like that. And then, you know, pop music, country music, all that stuff. So if you have all that going on and understand what all those things are, and then you add a strong rhythmical concept to all that, you can do some interesting things within the genre.
Sure.
With all that. So I've been dealing with that over the years, and helps me play with a lot of variety of different drummers.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Just if you could go back in time, is there any advice that you would give a young Jimmy Haslip?
Well, you know, I kind of feel like I did a lot of the right things. You know, I mentioned before keeping an open mind. I think that's a really good way to move things ahead, you know. Being a team player, I learned, you know, all through school, being involved in athletics. I was really into playing sports. Okay. And as you know, being on a sports team, everyone relies on one another to do their job and to contribute and to support the team. So it's no different than being on stage with, you know, 3 other guys.
Sure.
You're there to help things out, you know.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond, obviously. That's just one of the relegations of being on the bandstand with some guys. That's just one little aspect, but it's important. You know, if you go out there and just start flailing away and not listening to anybody, it's going to be a disaster.
If you don't pass the ball, nobody's going to score.
Exactly. Exactly. So, you know, team playing, open-mindedness, and, you know, just in those 2 aspects comes along being a good person, being a helpful person, and a supportive person, and even like someone that helps in solving problems, being a problem solver, and trying to learn as much about your vocation, what you do.
What you do.
You know, so that when you come to a situation with other musicians and you're in a room, say recording a record, you have knowledge that you can help.
Spending time on your craft.
And yes, and also being really focused on studying and practicing and all that, so that when you come together with musicians as well, you're prepared to...
Yeah, and you can concentrate on making music instead of just trying to get it right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So all those things, and I think that's always been part of who I am from the very beginning, even when I was playing bands in high school.
And through all of that is just a general work ethic, I guess.
Yeah.
That commitment.
Which I've been fortunate to have sort of built in. I mean, I've never really had to make myself study or practice or prepare for a gig. It's just something that I want to do.
Sure. And is there anything you're working on these days in your playing?
I'm always working on stuff. Yeah. I've been, and when I'm in a situation like this, we're here for a whole week, and I know I have to solo on certain tunes.
Yeah.
And I have, I've soloed on a bunch of these tunes a lot, so I have a lot of things already kind of that are in the
framework.
It's a framework of vocabulary of things I can use. Because I came up with a concept some years ago for a book. On improvisation.
Okay.
And basically, it's all this stuff. It's a ton of stuff. I even study out of the book because some of it I've forgotten. And I go, well, what was that? Basically, the concept of the book was, here you are, you're in the middle, and surrounded by all these different things that you can select at random, little tools. So scales, a lot of scales. There's so many scales, and that's always a study, to learn more scales. And I even in doing that, I came up with the idea of, all right, there's a system called pentatonic scales. Okay, what is a pentatonic scale? Pentatonic scale is a scale with 5 notes, and there's a normal pentatonic scale that's taught in school. And in the penta means 5, so 5 notes, and the 6th note is the octave, right? Yeah. And then it just so happens that when I organized them years ago, I realized that there were 5 inversions of a pentatonic scale up the neck.
Okay.
For each key.
Right.
In each key, and once you do those 5 patterns, then it repeats an octave above, right? Yeah. So all that made sense. Oh wow, okay, penta, 5 scales. But then in the last maybe 6 or 7 years, when I started playing with Allan Holdsworth, he started really stretching my harmonic knowledge to some other places. And I was trying to really figure out some different things to play, even though I didn't understand a lot of the things that he was playing. I mean, I could hear what he was playing, but I couldn't put my finger and tell you, this is what he's doing.
He has a kind of unique system as well, doesn't he? So you can't really tell you exactly what it is either.
No, it's very unusual and so beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable. So with that, I was motivated to just try to find some new shit to play. So I took the pentatonic scale, and then I started finding 5-note patterns that weren't in the normal configuration.
Okay.
And they're pentatonic scales, but they're
different,
now altered pentatonic scales. So I've ventured off in the last 7 years into finding as many altered pentatonic scales as I can possibly find and study them and try to memorize certain aspects of that. And hopefully in time, some of that ends up seeping into your fiber so that it just naturally comes out. And some of that I've noticed comes out.
Cool.
Not to my liking. I'm impatient about stuff like that, but I've also learned, even though with my impatience, I've learned to be patient, because I understand that sometimes the process takes longer than you would want, and that's just the way it is.
There's already so much information in there already that you're trying to squeeze more in, and it just takes time for things to become part of your language, I think.
Yeah.
When you already have something.
There's fingering and all that stuff, and I'm already sort of at a disadvantage in a certain way because I play upside down.
Okay.
And
I was wondering about that.
Are all
but
kind of weird.
Then on the flip side of that, you must have access to.
I have access to other things that conventional players don't have access to.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off in that sense,
Yeah, and the improvisation thing, did that start earlier on in your career?
I think when I started taking improvisation more seriously was in the mid-'70s when I was in the band with Flora Purim and Ayrto and this incredible trombone player named Raul de Souza. And, my improvisation was not worthy, really. It had something going on, but it needed a lot of work. And this trombone player in Ayrto Flora's band was very kind, and he would pull me aside and he gave me some pointers and things.
And was that about the same time you were taking lessons with Jacko?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So Jacko could see I had a lot of chops, but I just didn't have a lot of improvisational skills, and that's what he basically was talking to me about, learning more. That's why he pointed me towards Bach, and he pointed me towards
unusual kind of note combinations you might not
exactly
come up with. Yeah, because I remember hearing an interview with him, and he kind of said he would just play anything, play melodies, just read stuff, and just learn whatever he could.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's how you come up with new stuff, I guess.
That's how you do it. So he pointed me in that direction. And from that point on, since 75, it's been a study. And it's an ongoing study, and I'm still there. I was practicing this morning for a couple hours.
Still enjoying it.
Working on some things on this one tune. The one difficult thing is when you got a solo over one chord, then it's how do you make this one chord really interesting? And also, not just interesting, but also, tell a story.
Yeah. Do you feel as a bass player, we're at any kind of disadvantage when it comes to connecting soloistically with people?
Well, I think at first it was, and when I started pursuing all this in the 70s, I think I was at a serious disadvantage. But then, meeting Jacko and then listening to a lot of string bass players.
Okay.
I found that not to be true. I thought there is a way to be a very melodic instrument. And also even though I didn't really walk into this, but years later I started realizing that I was really into progressive rock. And a lot of those bass players were very melodic. Chris Squire, for one. Barry Oakley, you know who that is?
I know the name.
He was the bassist in the Allman Brothers.
Okay.
These guys were super melodic. And then, of course, I got really into Weather Report early in the 70s. And you had Miroslav Vitos, pretty incredible. And later, when they got into more electric stuff, I got into Alfonso Johnson, who was very modal. So that's when I started really realizing there's more to this instrument than just playing the root of the chord. And it can be, with some study and some serious focus, it can be made into a very melodic instrument that helps things in a very harmonic and melodic way. So in that sense, it's an interesting instrument because it also, as I mentioned before, I look at the instrument as a melodic drum, but then at the same time, it can also be an instrument that plays a melody or a solo.
And is that why you were drawn to get in the sixth string to help with that melodicism?
Well, that was part of it. Really, the one main motivation was that I wanted to bring some other element into the Yellowjackets, and I got hit in the head with a light bulb one day, and I thought, you know, we started off the first couple of records with one of the voices being guitar, and now, you know, years later in the mid '80s into the '90s, there was no guitar in the band, so that's when I thought, if I extend the range of the instrument and go into the baritone guitar range, I could bring at least a little bit of that color into the music. And as a result, I ended up playing a lot of melodies with the saxophone or the piano, and it's a nice sound. So that was the original motivation, but then, of course, that motivation grew in a lot of ways, you know, with the soloing and all that.
And would you ever do a gig like Jeff Lorber on just a P bass?
I could do it, but I would feel partly naked.
Right.
Yeah, because I feel like I contribute on levels, other places, you know, with higher notes and soloing.
Chordal stuff.
You know, chordal stuff, and
also dropping down below the
E. Going way down into the low D flats and C's and B's. You know, it adds another dimension to the bottom end. So, yeah, and we've done gigs as a trio. So in that sense, it's keyboards, drums, and bass, and then I'm also sort of doing the guitaristic kind of thing. Although I'm far from being a guitar player. I know a little bit about, you know, playing some chords, and the solo thing enters into this kind of blues guitar kind of thing. So it does add that color to the music, and then I'm also extremely comfortable just playing bass. So
cool. You got a
CDs.
couple of CDs to show us.
Okay, and I brought you presents. So something old and something new and something. Hi
Jeff.
And something that
something
I just
borrowed and something blue.
something that something I didn't produce but played on. So this new one is a guitarist from LA. His name is Jeff Richman. I produced this as my third record producing for him, and Vinny Colaiuta's on drums. A nice list of musicians on there,
featuring and Will Lee.
Will Lee played on two tunes. Yeah.
Bob. Oh, Gergo
Borlai, who I've played with a bunch.
Wow, he's
fantastic. So there's that, and I produced. That's a nice record, and that's just coming out in November, so you have an advanced copy. Oh. This is old. This is my third solo project. It's called Nightfall, and I produced it with Joe Vannelli, who's Gino Vannelli's older brother. I featured him because he played all the keyboards on there.
Okay.
And we wrote all the material together.
And what's the band on this?
Well, it's just basically me and Joe, and then we've brought in a few people to guest.
Yeah? Okay.
There's absolutely no drums on it.
Right, really?
It's all programmed.
Ah, okay. So there is drums, but it's
not. Oh, there's drums, but no real drummer. It's all loops and programs and samples. And then there is a percussionist that I brought in, a Cuban percussionist that I've worked with, who did some timbales and congas, and another percussionist who I produced a band that he was in. Interesting guy. I think he studied percussion in Haiti, and he's an American guy, but he's very interesting guy. He plays with a jam band called String Cheese Incident. That's very interesting.
And then, Nightfall?
Nightfall is the name of that record. And then I was brought in to play bass on this interesting project, which is the best I can do is say that it's a progressive country rock record that has everything from like Crosby, Stills, Nash and the Eagles type vocals and things, and even progressions, but it also has an element of like Jethro Tull.
Okay.
So it's very interesting.
Some flute on there?
Yeah. There's a flautist whose name is Toad.
Sounds appropriate.
And it's called Magic Music.
Cool.
And there's also I was basically like a guest. Yep. There's a group of guys, 3 guys that sing, wrote all the songs, and were really the original members of the band. But the producer, who's a friend of mine named Tim Goodman, is a really good guitar player, songwriter, and vocalist himself. He produced it, and they needed to get a bass player on a lot of the material, so he brought me in. Okay. But they also brought in Billy Payne on piano, who played with Little Feat.
Right, okay.
And Scarlett Rivera on fiddle, who played with Bob Dylan. And also Sam Bush on fiddle, who played with Bela Fleck.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so there's some really cool music there. So enjoy that.
I will. I can't wait to check them out, man.
That's it for...
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I could have brought, but I got that in my suitcase for you.
Can't wait to check it out. And we got
and then we got your record.
One for you.
All right.
Did you get it?
Thank you very much. No. I'm going to check this out.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it, man.
Cool. Pickpocket.
Pickpocket, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Jimmy, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure and a blast. Guys, thanks for watching. Keep practicing, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers.